The first light of dawn spilled like molten gold across the restless waters of the Indian Ocean, casting the fishing boats in a halo of fire and shadow. The village of Mbare lay still behind the dunes, its huts breathing in unison with the tide. On the edge of the world, where water kissed sky, a young girl named Sefina stood barefoot in the cool sand, her eyes locked on the far horizon as though she could pull it closer with the sheer force of her longing. That morning, the wind carried a strange scent, not of salt or seaweed, but of something unplaceable, something that seemed to hum beneath her skin, promising a change that would ripple far beyond the shore. In Sefina's gaze, the ocean lived twice, once before her, endless and shimmering, and again within her, doubled and distorted, as if she carried her own horizon deep inside her mind. People in Mbare whispered about her eyes. Some said they belonged to the sea, stolen from a drowned princess who had bargained with the tides. Others claimed they could see storms before they came. Sefina herself knew only this: whenever she looked too long at the place where the water met the sky, she felt an ache so deep it nearly bent her in half. It was not sadness, nor joy, but something far stranger, a calling. The market of Mbare was a feast for the senses, the burnished reds of ground paprika, the sharp sweetness of dried mango, the hypnotic rhythm of hands pounding millet. Yet, Sefina drifted through it like a ghost, her body there but her spirit wandering. Her neighbors greeted her with nods, their words swallowed by the clamor. She smiled faintly but kept glancing toward the gap between the huts where the ocean glimmered. That hidden thread of the horizon tugged at her constantly, a pull she could neither explain nor resist. She wondered if the rest of the village felt it too and simply ignored it, or if it was hers alone, a secret thread stitched into her soul. Near the outskirts of the market, where shadows from the palm trees bent and twisted, an old woman sat cross-legged on a reed mat. Her hair was threaded with shells that clinked when she moved, and her eyes were pale as seawater. As Sefina passed, a gnarled hand shot out, ripping her wrist with surprising strength. "You're looking too far," the woman rasped, her voice like waves breaking on hidden rocks. "The horizon is not yours to take." Sefina froze. She had never spoken to this woman, yet her words sliced through her like a blade. Before Sefina could ask what she meant, the old woman let go, her gaze sliding back to the earth as if she had already said too much. The moon hung low over the water, its reflection broken into trembling shards by the restless waves. Sefina sat cross-legged on the cliff's edge, her breath fogging in the cool night air. The village slept behind her, its fires gone cold. Before her stretched the infinite, where darkness swallowed the line between ocean and sky. But to Sefina's eyes, that line was not still, it shimmered, shifted, and seemed to beckon. She remembered the old woman's warning, yet it only sharpened her curiosity. If the horizon was not hers to take, then who did it belong to? And what would happen if she tried? By dawn, the horizon had changed. The once serene line was now a bruised smear between churning sea and turbulent sky. Sefina stood ankle-deep in the foam, the wind clawing at her hair, and the first low rumble of thunder vibrating in her chest. The villagers rushed to pull their boats ashore, shouting warnings, but Sefina did not move. The storm did not frighten her, in fact, it seemed to sharpen her senses, as though every gust carried a message meant only for her. She could almost hear it in the hiss of the wind, "Come closer." The horizon had never looked so alive, so reachable, so ready to be taken. That night, while rain hammered the roof, Sefina sat cross-legged at her grandmother's feet. The old woman's fingers moved deftly through strands of dyed raffia, weaving patterns older than the village itself. In the flicker of the fire, she spoke of the horizon keeper, a spirit who walked the world's edge, making sure the sky and sea never swallowed each other whole. "Some have tried to steal the horizon," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "They say it is beautiful in your hands, but cursed in your heart." Sefina's pulse quickened. She wanted to ask more, but her grandmother's eyes had drifted to the door, as if listening for footsteps no one else could hear. That night, Sefina dreamed she was weightless, drifting high above the ocean. Below her, the horizon was no longer a straight line, it curled like a ribbon, shimmering with impossible colors. Along its narrow path walked a figure cloaked in wind and spray, faceless yet certain in its steps. As it passed beneath her, it paused, and though it had no mouth, she felt the words in her bones: "If you take me, you take my burden." She reached out, fingers brushing the edge, and the world shivered around her. She woke before dawn, the taste of salt heavy on her lips, her hands still trembling from what she'd nearly touched. Her grandmother said nothing the next morning, only pressed a wooden staff into her hands. The spiral carved at its tip was smooth from generations of touch, its grooves darkened by age. "If you are to seek it," the old woman murmured, "you must have something to anchor you." Sefina traced the spiral with her thumb, feeling the faint hum within it, as though the wood still remembered the tree it came from, and the storms it had faced. With the staff planted firmly in the sand, she looked out at the horizon. Today, she would go farther than any fishing boat dared. The tide was low and the world smelled of wet salt and promise. Sefina pushed her small boat into the shallows, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand. The sail caught the first blush of morning light as she heaved herself aboard, her staff resting across the bow like a sleeping guardian. Behind her, the village still slept, unaware that one of its daughters was about to slip past the known world. The sea lapped against the hull, gentle at first, but with each stroke of wind it carried her farther from the shore, and closer to the thin silver thread she had always craved. Hours passed, and the shore dissolved into a blur of memory. The water around her deepened to an endless blue, the kind that seemed to swallow thought itself. Ahead, the horizon began to shift, bending and glimmering like molten glass. It was no longer simply where sky met sea, it was a living thing, trembling at the edges, pulsing as if it had a heartbeat. The closer she sailed, the more she felt it watching her. This was no ordinary distance, this was a threshold. Every instinct told her to turn back, but the pull was stronger now, woven into her breath and blood. The line she had chased her whole life was suddenly at her bow. And then, it broke. The ocean spilled downward in a roaring cascade, vanishing into an abyss that had no bottom. The horizon was not a wall but a lip, the edge of a bowl turned inside out. Mist rose in great silver plumes, wrapping her in a cold embrace. Sefina gripped her staff and leaned over, staring into the unending fall. Somewhere in the roar, a voice called her name, not in warning, but in welcome. She realized with a shiver that she had not stolen the horizon, it had been waiting for her. From the swirling mist, the figure from her dream emerged, its form both solid and shifting. The cloak it wore billowed like storm clouds, and in its hands was a band of pure light, curved, shimmering, the exact shape of the horizon. "You've come far, child," the figure said, its voice carrying the weight of tides and time. "But the horizon is not a prize. It is a burden, passed from keeper to keeper." The light in its hands pulsed, and Sefina felt her heart echo its rhythm. She knew then that the horizon had chosen her, and that choice could not be undone. When her fingers brushed the band of light, the sea below her shifted into something vast and strange. It was no longer water, but a map, continents sprawling like the veins of a leaf, rivers twisting into silver threads, mountains casting shadows across lands she had never known. She could feel the horizon's weight now, not on her shoulders but in her mind, as if every edge of the world had been stitched into her thoughts. The figure watched her silently, and she understood, she could go anywhere, see anything. But she could never again return unchanged. The horizon's light curved beneath her feet, no longer water, but a pathway suspended in the air, glowing with an otherworldly brilliance. The sea was gone. Instead, the road of light led her between two suns, one gold, one pale blue, casting twin shadows across her face. Every step forward seemed to stretch time, days and nights folding into one another like pages in a book. She realized she was moving not through distance, but through possibility itself. The staff in her hand felt heavier now, anchoring her to herself as the air thickened with the scent of rain from worlds she had never walked. At the end of the light road lay a place unlike any she had imagined. The horizon here was no straight line, it arched high above, a perfect glowing ring that encircled the entire sky. Below, the sea and air seemed to share no boundary. Winged fish soared upward before diving into clouds, while birds skimmed across the surface of the water as though it were solid. The sound of the place was a chorus of wind, waves, and whispers she could not yet understand. She knew instinctively that this was the heart of the horizon, the place where all edges met before being sent back into the world. Sefina stepped into a hall that was neither stone nor wood, but woven entirely from strands of horizon light, each one humming with a faint, low song. The walls curved gently, holding countless doorways that opened onto impossible vistas, a desert where rivers floated through the air, a forest whose leaves glowed like embers, a city of glass that reflected a sky full of moons. She understood then that the horizon was not a boundary, but a network, every edge of the world touching every other, bound together by unseen hands. Somewhere within this hall, she sensed, was her path forward, and perhaps, her way back. The figure in the cloud cloak appeared once more, stepping out from the light. Without a word, they placed their palms against Sefina's head, and her world exploded into a flood of memory. She saw the first horizon ever drawn, the endless migrations of winds, the quiet grief of seas that never met. She felt the footsteps of those who had carried this burden before her, warriors, healers, poets, wanderers. Each had left a fragment of themselves in the horizon's weave, and now they were all part of her. When the figure finally stepped back, she was trembling, her mind alight with stories older than the ocean itself. Her initiation began without warning. The hall dissolved into an endless curve of horizon, stretching in every direction. Beneath her feet, the path was narrow, shimmering with unstable light. All around, storms bloomed from nothing, walls of rain, twisting cyclones, flashes of impossible colors that formed faces from her past. Each step was a battle against distraction, against the temptation to follow a mirage back to the familiar. The horizon tested her resolve, its light shifting whenever her focus wavered. Only when she pressed forward without looking back did the storms begin to fade, leaving her alone beneath a sky split in two. At the path's end, two doors rose from the light like opposing dreams. One showed the warm, sunlit shore of Mbare, her grandmother weaving, the market alive with voices, the smell of smoked fish drifting through the air. The other opened onto a corridor of infinite glow, its end hidden beyond curves she could not see. Her heart ached for the first, yet something deeper whispered toward the second. She understood now that carrying the horizon meant she could never fully belong to one shore. But she could still choose where to walk next. And choices, she knew, were as heavy as tides. She stepped forward without hesitation. As she crossed the threshold, the entire horizon bent toward her, its light curling inward until it pressed against her chest. It sank into her as if it had always belonged there, settling beside her heartbeat, not replacing it, but harmonizing with it. A rush of warmth and clarity filled her. She could now sense every shore, every sky, every distant meeting of light and water. The staff in her hand hummed, and she knew it was bound to her forever. She was no longer simply Sefina of Mbare. She was Sefina, keeper of the horizon. When she emerged from the surf at dawn, the sea was calm, the air thick with the smell of rain far away. The villagers gathered silently, their eyes widening at the sight of her, barefoot, staff in hand, hair streaked with strands of light that caught the sun. She spoke no words, yet they seemed to understand that she had gone somewhere beyond the maps, beyond even the reach of their prayers. The old woman with the shells in her hair bowed her head as Sefina passed, murmuring something the waves swallowed before anyone else could hear. From the high cliff, she looked once more at the place where the sky met the sea. But now, the horizon no longer felt distant, it leaned toward her ever so slightly, like a friend tilting closer to hear a secret. The wind carried the voices of storms yet to come, and she understood them as clearly as her own thoughts. Somewhere far away, another traveler might be staring at this same line, wondering if they could take it. She smiled, knowing the horizon's answer, and knowing she would be there to meet them when the time came. In the days that followed, the villagers sometimes claimed to see her walking where no path existed, along the thin line of light where the ocean met the sky. Her steps left behind faint, glowing footprints that shimmered for days before fading into the water. And each time, the tides seemed gentler afterward, the storms arriving later, the sunsets burning a little longer. They did not understand that these were not miracles, but part of her duty. She was tending the edges, mending the seams where the world could unravel. Far beyond the sight of Mbare, the horizon stretched in an unbroken circle, its light alive with motion. At its very heart stood Sefina, staff raised high, her silhouette etched against the meeting of gold and blue. Around her, the light bent and curled, carrying whispers to every shore, whispers of a girl who had once chased the horizon and, instead of stealing it, had become its keeper. And so the world turned, its edges safe in her hands, while she watched for the next soul brave enough to follow the pull of that thin, silver line.